This is Aaron Rice, your host for Maryland Climate Tech 2026. I am very excited about our next guest, Ryan Smith. And Ryan, why don't you tell folks who you are, where you are, and what you do?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Aaron. I appreciate it. I'm Ryan Smith. I am founding partner of ModX. We are an advisory-based, research-based advisory and consulting group that offers support to the offsite and industrialized housing industry. I'm also a professor and director of the School of Architecture at the University of Arizona, and I am located, in Tucson, Arizona. Really happy to be here and appreciate the invite.
Absolutely, absolutely. I appreciate that. I think I first discovered you on a panel at an Ivy Innovation Summit. And I believe you were kind of breaking down, I think at that time it was maybe a recent report, but it was a report that you and I guess some other organizations did in association with housing and urban development. Can you talk a little bit about kind of that report and kind of how things are fluid and changing with the new administration and what they're looking to do with housing and, industrialized construction?
Yeah, great questions. ModX, the advisory group that I helped found, has been partnering with the National Institute of Building Sciences, which is the congressionally mandated group that deals with technology and code sort of interfaces. It's established back in the 60s and 70s. And we have been doing work supported by U.S. Housing and Urban Development, its federal department, for many years now. The report or the presentation you saw with Ivory Innovations, and I also serve on their board, their advisory board. That presentation was based on a report that we delivered to HUD titled Offsite Construction for Housing Research Roadmap. So it identified 6 primary barriers or challenges that we're having in the United States to realizing, scaling, and accelerating a factory-based industrialized housing. And those 6 major areas, spanned across a lot of the topics you would expect, but went into depth on specific questions, research questions people could ask both in industry, government, and academia that would address the barriers. So there were things related to regulatory and regulatory reform, standards and system performance or the products, workforce development, finance and financing offsite projects, which is a little unique, project delivery contracts, and then business models and how they change when we do factory-based. So that's what I was presenting on. What we found in that report is one of the primary barriers, the really lead or priority issue that needs to be addressed was regulatory. Building codes and zoning codes, land use policy, that were hindering the uptake and scaling and evolution of offsite construction in the United States. And so on the back end of that, NIBS, National Institute of Building Sciences, and ModX proposed to HUD a follow-on project that was focused on developing an action plan for scaling and accelerating offsite construction to address a series of challenges, but in particular regulatory. And that project has been wrapped up. It's going to be published here soon. In the new administration, the new federal administration, what has changed and direction we're going is less of a focus on federal, what the feds can do, and more of a question about what can the locals do, what can the states do. And we know we need both in order to address housing. But particularly in this current political and economic climate, I think the emphasis on building regional ecosystems within our states or within our regions that can foster an industrialized housing innovation system, really, right? With all the players sort of contributing to that technically through knowledge, through policy change, is starting to see a lot of traction, and we're excited about that. So our most current project we're also working on with the same partners and funded by HUD. We have 6 regions we're currently working with: Greater Boston, Minnesota, Utah, Washington State, the Pacific Northwest, California, and Virginia. And as a follow-on to that work, Maryland got a hold of us and the folks in Baltimore at BMod, Baltimore Modular, and we're doing a
Mhm.
very similar process right now with them, which is to identify what are the key barriers, just like we did with the feds in the regions, and then working with the stakeholders in those regions and trying to foster an ecosystem through developing an action plan that could be actioned over a series of pilots that could study things like let's build with offsite, let's see how it works,
Mhm.
but also what are the regulations and finance to make that work, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's been our journey. We're really excited about that, and this is going to lead, I'm sure, to what we hope are successes and more case studies for how regions do this. So it can not only go to the six plus Maryland, it can go all over the country, and people can duplicate creating action plans and seeing success and scaling and accelerating offsite construction for housing.
Well, yeah. Wow. So hearing you speak at the annual event in Utah a couple of years ago, and then now yesterday being on a Zoom talking about Baltimore is just so exciting that it's coming home to our market, which actually has, which you probably already know, the most we have more historic properties in Baltimore than New York and DC combined,
Yeah.
more than any other city in the country. So. We've got a lot of retrofits that need to be done. I'm partial to new construction, volumetric, more specifically.
Mhm.
But when I'm watching Congress and talking, kind of real time about federal regulation and kind of easing the HUD code and maybe taking the wheels off the chassis to make it to make offsite construction maybe more affordable because my research says that the manufactured home is what 10-17% of the affordable market right now. It's still the
Right.
most affordable home that you could get. But there's still, maybe a stigma connected to it. I know as a real estate practitioner, when I go into our local MLS system and I type in modular or volumetric, only manufactured,
Mm.
homes come up, mobile homes as most people would think of. But we're talking about something different. We're talking about, panelized and volumetric construction. But can you maybe touch a little bit on maybe how local governments can help de-risk some of this? I know there are some initiatives in my hometown of Syracuse, New York, where the local city and government entities kind of got involved and helped de-risk some of this. I know that NYSERDA does that on the energy side in New York. What are you seeing across the country in regards to governments helping to de-risk some of this?
Yeah. I think there's two major actions or things that local governments can do to address offsite construction, scaling it. And let's be clear in backing up for your audience, the reason that ModX has been pushing on the adoption acceleration of factory-based offsite construction is because it has been demonstrated both in the United States through manufactured housing, you talked about, but also in other countries, Sweden, Japan, et cetera, that utilizing industrialized means for housing has led to the rapid supply of housing and has been able to deliver on affordability and resilience. So if you can hit those markers through some sort of tools or some sort of mechanism, we should really be paying attention to it. So that's why we're pushing it, to be clear. It's not technology for technology's sake
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
policy
Hmm.
change for policy change sake.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's to get to that end goal, right? Which is
Hmm.
we need to address our housing crisis in
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
country.
Hmm.
So what can the locals do to accelerate and address offsite construction for their regions? Two major things that ModX has been working on with these regions to do that. One is demand aggregation. So a factory environment is very different than a job site,
Hmm.
traditionally built housing project, in that the factory, right, is very quick in the way it produces. The labor is consistent, but it needs constant throughput to feed the machine, just like any other manufacturing operation. And the cyclical nature of housing development oftentimes is a misfit for manufacturing. They don't come together, they don't align. The starts and stops of construction have caused many offsite factories to start and stop and go out of business. We've seen that in the paper a lot. So local
I
government
see
can.
you're not naming names, but we'll
No, I wouldn't do that. Um, and I have deep respect, to be clear, for the innovators and entrepreneurs that go after this, right? I mean, they
Right,
just put their
right.
necks on the line to
That's right.
try and change things. So it's an incredible characteristic that people have. I don't know that I have that in me, but it's amazing. So what can locals do? Yeah, I think anything to positively affect demand aggregation can be helpful from the local government standpoint. So let's talk about that. Direct procurement, perhaps, right? If there is a government project that can help feed that factory line.
Hmm.
But there's also a concern with public procurement laws with regards to directly procuring government through a single vendor, which would be a
Hmm.
factory.
Hmm.
So ModX has talked a lot about other modes of local government involvement in stimulating offsite construction, and that would be along the lines of indirect procurement, meaning incentives perhaps for government programs or other opportunities as developers utilize offsite construction, or say loan or grant programs for the factories themselves, right? As an
Hmm.
economic development opportunity or workforce development opportunity for their regions. There's lots of benefits to having a factory in one's backyard for beyond the housing situation. Other modes of indirect procurement, mortgage incentives, for example, could points be brought down because one is using a more innovative method of construction. And then probably the biggest one we've seen in places like Japan and Sweden has been the alignment of societal goals in a region with the fact that offsite construction has the opportunity to deliver on those goals. So what goals am I talking about? Perhaps there are energy or resilience goals, durability goals. There might be goals centered around, like we talked about, workforce development and
Hmm.
or manufacturing jobs. In as much as those things can align, there's great opportunity. And so that leads to really the second major thing that we recommend to local governments, and that is regulatory reform. Sometimes zoning codes are written in certain municipalities that unknowingly limit the use of any offsite technology, right? A panel,
Hmm.
a module,
Hmm.
because that zoning ordinance is by default referencing perhaps HUD code or manufactured home code, which does have some limitations we know on where it can be placed. Although zoning codes are rapidly changing around this country, we know they really are. Reform, zoning reform is a real thing, and people are moving to form-based codes and other mechanisms. But the big one that we talked about previously, Aaron, is building code. Um, so International Residential Code, International Building Code, those are our model codes developed, right? And they were harmonized back in year 2000. But every jurisdiction adopts a different model building code, and there's challenges oftentimes with how the state sees offsite construction versus how the local sees it, and that disconnect between the two. So in our beautiful federated states model of the United States of America, and giving power and authority to locals, um, it really has some challenges associated with the lack of harmonization of codes across a significant geographic region. If I'm a manufacturer or I'm a stakeholder that is delivering off-site housing projects, I'm really going to need some consistency because my factory may serve many jurisdictions within a state and many states within my region, right? Say a 300-mile shipping radius is about what we would suggest. So those are the things that local government can do, is how can we revamp those regulatory standards, harmonize them, and maybe create more of an easier pathway so people know how to navigate it and can be predictable, and then that can help build the demand aggregation side.
Hmm.
Could I conclude that thought? One can certainly invest in demand aggregation through direct or indirect procurement, like we've been talking about. A local government can do that, but without, in our opinion, without significant regulatory reform and addressing that issue, the long-term benefits of that demand aggregation effort will probably be null and void. We
Mhm.
have seen that precedent in other places. So I'll stop there just by saying that I think that's what local government can do. Demand aggregation through various things, including harmonizing, say, award criteria through societal goals. We're going to invest in these various things that are going to push offsite construction and housing supply and affordability. And on the other side, what can we do to create a regulatory environment that allows industrialized construction as well as on-site traditional construction to succeed in its most advantageous way?
Absolutely. And folks, if you've never been to an off-site construction factory, it's a very interesting sight to see for sure. I've visited three. I'm sure you've probably visited close to 300 globally or maybe more. But let's go back a little bit. Let's go back in the history a little bit and talk about kind of where this started. My research says pre-World War II, Sears and Roebuck's with the kit home and we really here in the United States really innovating when it came to factory built homes and kit of parts and those types of things. And then Sweden's aggressive wanting to build 1 million homes in 10 years, I
Yep.
think is what it was. And now what close to 80 to 90% of their residential construction is, factory built. And I'm a fan of what Skanska and IKEA have done with their company BookLook.
Mhm.
And we'll link all that. All these websites will magically appear on the screen post-production. But, kind of what can we learn from what happened, pre-World War II and like who's getting it really right? And, what can we learn from a BookLook here in the States?
Yeah, all great questions. Um, so here in the United States, yeah, pre-World War One, we go into World War Two, um, and there were quite a few technologies developed in with respect to the wartime period, right? The precast technology, steel, really came on strong, um, and post World War II, or just coming during the war and then right after the World War II here in the United States, there was quite a bit of interest and bullish attitude towards converting what was wartime factories for shipbuilding, tank building into what was needed at the time, which is homes, right?
Hmm.
For
Hmm.
the growing population and
Hmm.
boomer population.
Hmm.
And so there were lots of efforts initiated to try and do that. But really, that took hold in a major way in the early 60s, I would say, and into the late 60s. And during that time, there were several federal legislative actions that were made um, in order to really meet the need of the growing country. And one of those was an effort as part of an act that was passed. This effort was called Operation Breakthrough.
Hmm.
Operation Breakthrough was to identify what were promising technologies from factories
Hmm.
and then leveraging those with different cities and municipalities to build pilot projects across the country. And they were testing two things. They were testing technologies. They were also testing policy and regulation and could it be done? So we've been doing this for a long time. There was a change of administration about that time.
And the energy crisis didn't help.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So economic
1970s.
economic decline, yeah.
Mhm.
Um, and I would just back up by saying at the same time, other countries were looking at this, as you suggested, Aaron. So we know that Sweden was looking at this. We know that Japan was looking at this. The UK was looking at this, because they were all, in many ways, facing the same sort of societal pressures, right? Growing populations, needing to build an economic development model for their country. Uh, but we had a change in presidential administration to Nixon, and that program got squashed, Operation Breakthrough. And so a lot of the investment and knowledge that we had developed in some ways went stagnant. The one major outcome from that effort was the two major efforts was number one, the establishment of a Department of Housing and Urban Development, right about that time, right, which was it had a mission to try and deliver on this promise of housing. And then the second major one was and it took until 1976 to officially put it in print, was the HUD code, the official standard of the manufactured home code. So many lament the manufactured housing industry and say, it has a perception of being lower quality. But it was really a struggling grown-up RV industry that had to have standards and regulations put around it so it was safe for humans, and that was a big deal. But it also led to a federally preemptive national building code that we still have to this day, the only one for anything that has a chassis on it. And as you just alluded to, that has recently been passed that is not a requirement anymore. And who knows what the impact of that is going to be? I don't know. Needs to be tested, needs to be asked, needs to be a question. Um, anyhow, that did go forward. But all of the investment in really sophisticated like closed panel systems and three-dimensional modular systems, a lot of that went away, and really took till the 90s and early 2000s to really start to make its way back. And now there's great interest in it because I think we reached a fever pitch moment in our housing crisis where the pain of changing, right, is less than the pain of staying the same. Pain of staying the same is really painful right now for a lot of people. Our kids can't afford houses, right? That's the way it is, and we want to change that for them. And so I think folks are ready to look in a different direction. Sweden and Japan continued. They continued through that same period in the mid 60s and 70s, and they built effectively very robust, what we would call national innovation systems, ecosystems within their countries in which regulations were aligned with industry. And there was almost an industrialized or manufactured industrial policy that went forward in those countries. And we see that with other products that they develop, other wood products in Sweden that have become worldwide, right? IKEA, for example. And you look at Japan, of course, the whole automobile industry, right? So those countries have really fostered their housing industries at the same time and learned as a manufacturing culture. We have not done that in the United States. We have very mature manufacturing industries, certainly in IT, in automobile, in other areas. But when you look at the housing industry and construction more broadly, we have not been able to industrialize those industries. So here we are, we're back, we're talking about this, and I think people are ready in our country to try and solve it. And I'm excited to be part of it. It's not going to be easy because it's cultural, it's social, it's financial, it's technical, and it requires an interdisciplinary approach. And oftentimes at ModX, we say to really solve this issue nationally and at the local level, it's going to require a quadruple helix of innovation, which has often been talked about. Ledesdorf talked about it in his literature, that it requires academia, research, it requires industry, all the players in industry, it requires government, and it requires the non-government or nonprofit housing industry to really band together and try and solve this problem. So I'm bullish, I'm excited about trying to solve this issue, and I think industrialized housing still holds great promise for addressing our housing needs.
Well, it sounds like Baltimore checks a lot of those boxes. We've got depending on who you ask, anywhere from 10 to 15,000 vacant and abandoned homes, 20 to 25,000 vacant lots. A large percentage of those are city owned, government
Right.
owned. So maybe that's a way to help de-risk some of this development. We're close to the, federal government, the national seat. We've got a 300-year-old, our inner harbor's 300-year-old, but we've got a very vibrant port to be able to transport some of these technologies throughout the country. And we've got, warehouse space as well. So I think there's definitely a lot of opportunities here. Um, I'm for some reason, I don't know why, but I think I know why. I'm very a fan of more volumetric. I'm a fan of being able to have a um, a cube come or a rectangle, a box come that's 80% finished in the factory to the site.
Mm.
It feels like it de-risks a lot of things. It feels like it's under roof and occupied and has the appropriate permits, maybe a little bit faster. We in our region, do a lot of panelized construction based on the
Yep.
factories that are in our immediate jurisdiction. Those can, be at a premium, $400 a square, so it sometimes is difficult to pencil. Um, do you have a preference on it, on whether it's panelized or SIPs or volumetric, and what's happening over in Japan and Europe? What methodologies are they using? What's working over that way?
That's a great question. Um, I think, our perspective at Modex is we are technology
Agnostic.
agnostic.
Yeah.
We have to be. However, in our advising, we suggest using certain technologies based upon the housing type, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So we see a lot of um, uh, large multifamily housing for rent, which has been a typology that is actually in decline right now as far
Hmm.
as its
Hmm. Hmm.
speed of delivery
Hmm.
and uptake. But that has a certain kind of technology that makes sense for it.
Hmm.
What we're really excited about, and I think holds a lot of promise for industrialized housing, is uh, for both panelized and three-dimensional volumetric modular, is this missing middle segment.
Hmm.
And that includes a lot of what you're talking about in Maryland with the vacants and retrofitting, because it is, I mean, those they're 3, 4 story blocks, right?
Yeah.
Townhouse, row house typology. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So offsite construction can really deliver, yes, at scale in a greenfield development, but we're seeing a lot of success lately in the sort of infill
Hmm.
application,
Hmm.
as well as addition or another unit on the site as zoning codes change. So that's quite exciting. And I think the retrofit holds a lot of promise in Baltimore, and we're going to test that with the folks in Baltimore. So that's quite exciting. Um, but yeah, oftentimes we rush to the technology and we ask what systems should be used. And I think we at ModX have tried to help project teams back up and ask, first of all, what market are you serving? What does that market need? What does then the design of the product need to be? And then what is your platform that could offer flexibility? That could be panelized, that could be 3D volumetric modular. How could it be configured to get variety for many different situations? And then we come down and say, okay, then what specifically is the technology we need to use to get there? And what does the factory look like? That's maybe a more political answer, but I think we have to be situationally appropriate for the technology.
No, that's perfect. And I think in my studies of Book they identified, their avatar, who was their buyer. And they're probably the only company that I heard of. I'm newer to the space, but they're probably the only ones that maybe started out with who is our buyer?
Yeah.
A single teacher with two kids, right? That is our buyer, and then let's build that, apparatus around who our buyer is, and this factory is pumping out 1,000 homes a year, from what I understand, without, a lot of automation and robots. And the last number I heard was with 8 people in a factory. So they're doing something pretty right over there. Am I off base, or is my research
Well,
fairly accurate?
I think the numbers are a little optimistic, but
Okay.
yeah. But what has been interesting, Sweden's a unique culture, right?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
hard to do apples to apples comparisons
Yeah.
from a number of standpoints. First of all, it's quite homogeneous, has a single building code across the entire country.
Mm.
Um, Another sort of point being that their offsite construction industry really went panelized first and then three-dimensional volumetric modular after. And so there was an evolution of the technology and a sort of mastery of doing 2D panels closed, then assembling those into boxes and then shipping them. And really that whole industry grew out of what was a very robust and mature sawmill industry, forestry and sawmill. And so, a lot of those companies, offsite companies, started up as child or sister companies to the parent sawmill company. So
True.
that right, and they were capitalized by them early
Mhm.
on, financed by them. So that's
And
a
and based in the middle of a forest with woods all
exactly.
around.
Yeah. So it's really hard to compare there to the United States, but the lessons are pretty incredible, especially because Sweden still has a lot of the larger housing in concrete, right? And
Mm,
they build that way. And
mm,
so Bukluk's come along and said, let's find kind of this middle
mhm,
area.
mhm,
We
mhm,
built a lot of these homes historically out of wood, single
mhm,
family detached houses. And as we scale up and we kind of find that in between missing middle is small apartments, we could do that using the same approach. The other point I wanted to make about Sweden that's quite interesting is um, they have just an incredible ecosystem of those quad helix I was talking about, players, academia, non-government organizations, government and industry working together and pushing in the same direction in many ways. Related to that is a very robust out over time with their panelized industry growing and evolving, a very robust machine industry. So the machines that are used that you referenced in Booklook with not a lot of labor, they've a company called Randek. There's a competitive company in Germany called Weinmann. These are the two major commercially available machines that produce wall panels in Europe. And now they're coming and setting up, factories in the U.S. are procuring these machines. But that was all part of the ecosystem, right? You have a machine company, of course, that's going to supply these panelized companies with the machines they need.
mhm.
And it's quite remarkable how they have matured just even in the last 10 years with robotics in that company. So there's something to be learned there as well. That as one industry starts to flourish, another industry can also pick up and fill in those gaps and provide that value in the supply chain.
Well, I think that this methodology is definitely a solution for Maryland. We've got four pillars, four pretty big problems that I think industrialized construction has an opportunity to correct. Number one, Baltimore City has the highest rate of asthma-related fatalities in the nation,
Mm,
with African American women 4 times more likely to die from asthma than white men. Um, 1 in 4 of our homes have radon levels above the EPA action level of 4 picocuries per liter, which, by
wow.
the way, equates to smoking 8 cigarettes a day. Um, our annual energy costs, $6,500 on average, 540 some odd dollars a month, is the highest in the nation. And then we have sea level rise and low-lying areas on our Maryland Eastern Shore, the birthplace of Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and many others, and land subsidence. So we've got a lot of we're going to be losing a lot of properties because of that. And so I'm curious to know, you know, where do you see industrialized construction maybe solving, if not all four of those, one or two that we of the challenges that we have in our state.
Yeah, it's great question. So I think that we need innovation in order to overcome those challenges. When I say innovation, I'm not talking necessarily about technical innovation, right?
Mhm.
We're talking about social innovation, the integration and collaboration of players that could make a difference in solving those deep-seated and challenging issues that are
Mhm.
real. Um, and your question, how does industrialized construction do that? Industrialized housing is innovative, right? They always that industry always has to do research and development, has to sort of demonstrate, but also convince others of what it does, and has
Which
the
is which is the only sector of the construction industry that actually has a R&D department. Most construction does not. So I like that you mentioned that.
right. National Renewable Energies Laboratory is located in Golden, Colorado, and that's our Department of Energy laboratory that does focus in many ways on buildings.
Hmm.
And they've run an ongoing industrialized housing sort of cluster, research
Hmm.
cluster there. I've
Hmm.
supported that as an advisor. And some of the things they've done there, Aaron, is to say, okay, is it easier to do, say, energy efficiency measures, such as an appropriate air-to-air exchanger or air purifier or efficient um, heat pump
Hmm.
installation? Can I make a tighter envelope by doing it in the factory? And what they have found is that the price per square foot does go down when you do that operation again and again and again in the factory, and the performance goes up. So I think to the point you're making, the ability to invest in R&D, have a trained workforce that can get better and better in an operation, and then guarantee that that building is going to perform at the end of the day is more confident and higher with using industrialized methods. That's been proven in research now. So that's really exciting. It's really exciting. A lot of times people say, so why? Ryan, you're giving all these reasons why it's done. Why isn't it? And we've identified a lot of these barriers. But I think we just have to also face the fact that there are people in the traditional environment that are making a lot of money hand over fist and don't have any incentive to change that system, right?
Right. Right.
But I'm hoping, and I think we're getting there, where you and I mentioned this before, but you and my um, and our contemporaries' kids really are in a situation that they have trouble paying rent. And I myself don't want to keep helping them either by opening my house or keep paying rent. And I want to get them on their way and help them be productive and all of that. And we need the next generation to thrive. And so I think we're at a tipping point, is my opinion, where people are finally saying, I got to find some other way to do this to deliver housing. In particular, the socially minded and non-for-profit housing developers are trying to find a different way to do this.
Hmm.
And we're seeing a lot of interest from that group in particular at looking at offsite methods to increase their cycle times, to allow them to develop more housing for more people of at higher quality.
Hmm. Yeah, I often say that the building industry is the least digitized, declining in productivity, has a strong resistance to change. But I know ModX and BMOB are working very hard to change that. So I guess my final question as we close out is healthcare financing for healthy homes. Are you seeing any potential there? I know, are seeing any models across the country? Nonprofit healthcare institutions are, legally required to contribute healthcare benefit dollars to local communities. I know there are some hospitals and healthcare institutions across the country that are in the real estate development business to address the social determinants of health. I don't know that they're necessarily using offsite construction to do that, but I'm curious about two things. Number one is, what models are you seeing? And then, it's a big difference between going in a factory and seeing the amount of waste that the factory has. You might see a trash can or two, but when you go to a new home community where they're still building on site, you see dumpsters in the driving in the parking lots of each townhome, and they may be doing a row of townhomes. So the waste differential is crazy. I know I went in two different directions with that, but just curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, so we have seen those health benefits going to housing generally,
Mhm.
but by translation onto offsite construction, I don't think that bridge has been made yet in the country. You could be a pioneer here, Aaron. This is
There,
great.
there goes the opportunity.
Absolutely. So I do think there's great opportunity there. Um, the other thing is waste. You mentioned waste. There's a study done by my late colleague, just passed away, John Quale. He was a
Mm.
professor at University of New Mexico, and he and professors at Yale, who are in the industrial ecology area, ran a study to compare a traditional site-built sort of fourplex to a modular fourplex for the environmental and health impacts. And what they did find was that, as you would expect, that the modular project played out better than the site-built project. But from was waste an issue? Yes, absolutely. Waste was an issue. But the number one finding from both environment and health that was better for the modular project was actually the reduction in workers having to go to and from a job site
Yeah.
versus them going to a factory and just working there all day.
Mhm.
So it was the carbon and pollution emissions component or factor attributed to that. And so I don't, regardless of where people stand on sort of environmental policy and their feelings on climate change and the environment, having less pollution in the air is a good thing for our human health, frankly.
Right, right.
And so offsite construction does present that opportunity
Hmm. Hmm.
of doing it in a factory, capturing that waste, lowering emissions from transport. And then finally, it's less disruptive fundamentally on the job site. So imagine rocking up with, 8 boxes that could be set in a day and getting out of Dodge, and then
Hmm.
just having site workers finish up the finishes instead of the ongoing work that is required associated with site build construction. So, reducing schedules, that has, I think, a human health benefit, sound, quality of life,
70
less
degrees,
pollution.
70 degrees all day.
Yep. So the workers as well as the inhabitants of the neighborhood, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's too many benefits there to ignore that from a health standpoint, absolutely. But that has not been capitalized yet, that idea and that direction. So I encourage you to do that, Aaron. That's great.
I appreciate that. I am encouraged. And I appreciate you, man, for taking the time to do this. I know this is probably the least dollar productive activity you could do today, but our audience here in Maryland, number one, uh, is I know I'm very excited about the collaboration that you're working with VR, with Be More Collab. And very excited about that, and very excited to see and hear Baltimore being a part of that conversation. Is there something that I maybe missed and did not ask you that you want people to know about your work in ModX that maybe I didn't address?
I think, and just lastly, some of the research we've done internationally suggests, as I mentioned, that the regulatory environment has been developed in a way that's much more amenable to different forms of construction, i.e., factory based. And we are working with the National Institute of Building Sciences and a technical committee currently to investigate what it might mean to create a regulatory pathway that is system specific. So you could have panelized and modular systems on file, and it's called housing system certification.
Mm.
We just posted about it. We're going to be doing a lot of work over the next few years. I would encourage people to look at that. If you're in industry, and you might have a potential of a system that you're working on that you might want to get certified for use in jurisdictions. Or if you are a jurisdiction, a municipality, and you're thinking, I want to create regulatory pathways here, please do reach out. We're looking for partners on this as we move forward. And we'd be happy to provide more information and support.
And again, Ryan's contact information will magically appear on the screen and post, so everyone will have that. And yeah, if you wouldn't mind, you mentioned a few reports starting with HUD on into the recent one. If you wouldn't mind maybe forwarding some of those so we can make it, part of the program notes, that would be great. But this has been awesome. I couldn't have asked for more. I think you hit the nail right on the head, pun intended. And I appreciate your time, my friend.
Yes, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.